Okay. Well, hello, welcome, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Today is the 4th of November. You're on the platform of No Cold War, of Tricontinental, of the International People's Assembly, of the Palestinian People's Party. We're very happy to have you join us for this international webinar. The name of the webinar is pretty straightforward. The International Criminal Court must prosecute Israeli war crimes in Gaza. Now, I wanted to start for a few minutes by talking about the International Criminal Court's lead prosecutor, Karim Khan, King's Counsel, who was at the Rafah Crossing between Egypt and Gaza. Karim Khan released a statement after that, which is quite a beautiful statement in its own way. He said that innocent civilians are trapped under the weight of war. He talked about the brutal nature of war. He talked about the children, the lack of aid, the suffering of innocents, and so on. And then he mentioned that there is the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute is the treaty from 2002 that eventually established the International Criminal Court. He says, there's the Rome Statute. It's there in black and white, he writes. It's there in the Geneva Convention. It's there in black and white. He repeats, it's there in black and white. Indeed, what is there in black and white? The Geneva Conventions goes back to the 19th century, establishes the law of war, establishes red lines against certain kind of action, indiscriminate killing of civilians, for instance, transfer of populations, for instance, collective punishment, for instance. That's the set of Geneva Conventions, which starts in the 19th century, enters into the 20th century. In international treaty, it's there in black and white, he says. Then there's the International Criminal Court, founded upon the Rome Statute of 2002. That Rome Statute, fascinating, very important reading. Article 6 lays out crimes against humanity must be prosecuted. Article 7 lays out genocide must be prosecuted. Article 8 registers war crimes must be prosecuted. Karim Khan says that in January 2021, when he took over the office of lead prosecutor, he set up a team on Palestine. And yet, of course, the International Criminal Court hasn't moved. His statement, very powerful, very straightforward statement, but no warrant yet. Interesting, in March 2023, the International Criminal Court produced a warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin for the forcible deportation of 6,000 children from the war zone in Ukraine to Russia. They moved 6,000 children from Ukraine to Russia, for which there is an ICC warrant against Mr. Putin. In just these 4 weeks, 6,000 children have been killed in Gaza. They haven't been moved from Gaza into Israel. They have been murdered. 6,000 children murdered, no International Criminal Court warrant. Question for Karim Khan, King's Counsel. How does the International Criminal Court stand in front of the earth and justify itself when it is so blatantly operating with double standards? Today's webinar, joined by 3 very important people to help us through this, help us through the question of the ICC, but also the war being prosecuted by Israel against the Palestinians of Gaza. Also, of course, the history of apartheid, whether we can get through this. We have 3 people who are going to join us. First, we have Lur Salhi from the Palestinian People's Party. She's going to walk us through what's been happening in Gaza, the reaction, and so on. Then we're joined by Peter Mertens, the General Secretary of the Belgian Workers' Party. Also, he has a new book out called Mutiny. Peter is one of the few European politicians to come out there and say, where is the International Criminal Court? We're going to hear from him after Lur. And then finally, we'll hear from Roshan Dadu, who's the co-coordinator of BDS South Africa, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign initiated from Palestine in 2005. So important that the South African sector speak on this webinar, because after all, the year of the foundation of Israel, 1948, the year of the Nakba, the catastrophe, was also the year that apartheid was created in South Africa. That's going to be the nature of this webinar. So glad to have you join us from No Cold War. Lur, why don't we start with you? Please tell us a little bit about what's happening, how these laws are supposed to enact in the world of Palestine.
Thank you, Vijay. I'm Noor Salhi, a member of the Palestinian People Party and a lawyer from Palestine. And I have the honor to convey the image of the current situation in Palestine to people who played an important role in supporting the Palestinian cause. But first, allow me to ask you for a moment of silence for the souls of the martyrs of beloved Palestine. During the month of October of this day, till this day, 9,372 martyrs were murdered in Palestine, including 9,227 from Gaza City and 145 from the West Bank. Our people in general, and in the Gaza Strip in particular, are going through critical and extremely dangerous political and social conditions in their lives and struggle, considering the continuation of the widespread military aggression launched by the Zionist occupation against all of our people, especially in the Gaza Strip, and the genocide they have been exposed to since the 7th of October by targeting, killing, and erasing every living thing in Gaza, in addition to tightening the siege, collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, and erasing hundreds of families from the civil register, heading towards repeating the Nakba of 1948, which falls within the framework of liquidating the entire Palestinian issue. The aggression has confirmed that the Israeli occupation is a colonial project and an integral part of an exploitative, capitalist colonial system that seeks in every way to dominate Arab people, wealth, and resources. It is also part of the global imperialist system led by the United States. It has also proven again that it wants to complete its project that aims to ethnic cleansing through the politics of sanctions and genocide. In the meantime, some states has emerged in the world who support the occupation and colonialism project and is an essential partner to it. And some states who support our Palestinian people and stand for their rights and the clear role of the people in all of this has also emerged. Today's topic, the International Criminal Court must prosecute Israeli war crimes in Gaza, is a very important topic at the present time and must certainly be addressed. With this, I begin by asking a question that must be pointed out. For whose benefit was international law created? The first paragraph of Article 4 of the United Nations Charter stipulates the following. Membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present charter and in the judgment of organization are able and willing to carry out these obligations. In 1949, Israel was accepted to be a member of the United Nations in resolution number 273, and the agreement included this phrase. The General Assembly decides that Israel is a peace-loving state which accepts the obligations contained in the Charter and is able and willing to carry out those obligations. The acceptance of Israel as a member of the United Nations was based on its acceptance of the membership conditions. One of the most important being that it should be a peace-loving state, capable of fulfilling the obligations set forth in the United Nations Charter and desiring to do so. However, Israel has refrained from implementing all the resolutions issued by the United Nations. Additionally, it has violated all the principles and objectives of the United Nations Charter, including the fourth paragraph of Article 2, which states the following: all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any city, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Since 1948, which is 75 years ago, the Palestinian people have witnessed various types of crimes and massacres committed by the Zionist occupation. It is shameful that the General Assembly voted to admit Israel to the United Nations, claiming that Israel is a peace-loving state just 1 year after it occupied Palestine and committed heinous atrocities against the Palestinians during the Nakba. The Nakba constituted the largest ethnic cleansing operation of the 20th century, where over 955,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their villages and cities by Zionist militias to the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and neighboring Arab countries. Out of the 1.4 million Palestinians who were living in historical Palestine in 1948, Jewish settlers were placed in their stead. Zionist militias took over 774 Palestinian villages and cities during the Nakba, with 531 of them being completely destroyed, erasing their cultural and historical landmarks, while the remaining areas were subjected to Israeli occupation and its laws. According to the records of the United Nations Relief and UNRWA, there are 58 official refugee camps under its administration distributed as follows: 10 camps in Jordan, 9 camps in Syria, 12 camps in Lebanon, 19 camps in the West Bank, and 8 camps in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Nakba in 1948 was not the end. It was followed by other catastrophes, including the Nakba in 1967, which led to the displacement of around 200,000 Palestinians, most of whom went to Jordan. Furthermore, Israel's intention to annex the Palestinian territories with the support of the United States threatens to create a new catastrophe. This stated with what is known as the deal of the century, which aims to eliminate the refugee issue, deny the right to return, and determine their destiny, which derives its legitimacy from their historical right to their homeland. Since then, the crimes against the Palestinians have not ceased, and today, Israel is committing the worst atrocities against the Palestinian people in full view of the world, which constitute a clear violation of international rules and norms, disregarding all international agreements and treaties. What's happening in Palestine involves all types of crimes, including war crimes, aggression, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The Rome Statute defines the crime of genocide in Article 6, crimes against humanity in Article 7, and war crimes in Article 8. All elements of these crimes apply to the situation that Palestinians are currently living in, specifically in Gaza Strip. Due to time constraints and the indignity of reviewing all of the occupiers' crimes against Palestinians and violations of international treaties, I will highlight some of the violations committed by the occupation, specifically in the Gaza Strip, which constitute the elements of the crimes as stipulated in the Rome Statute. Israel used and continued to use internationally prohibited weapons against Palestinians. According to the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, Israel dropped over 25,000 tons of explosives on the Gaza Strip since October 7th of this year, equivalent to 2 nuclear bombs. Each person in the Gaza Strip received about 10 kilograms of explosives, meaning that the destructive power of the explosives dropped on Gaza exceeds what was dropped on the Hiroshima, despite the fact that the area of the Japanese city is 900 square kilometers, while Gaza's area is not more than 360 square kilometers. Gaza is a Palestinian city, isolated not only from the outside world, but also from the entirety of Palestine. It is more like a large prison, where the worst crimes have been committed in every year since 2006. And for 16 years, there has been no international solution to stop these crimes. The Humanitarian Monitor documented the use of internationally prohibited weapons by Israel in its attacks on Gaza Strip, particularly cluster and phosphorus bombs. These are highly explosive substances that react rapidly with oxygen and cause severe second and third degree burns. Gaza documented injuries similar to those caused by dangerous cluster bombs, as they contain small, high explosive devices that penetrate the body and cause internal explosions, with severe burns that melt the skin of those injured by them and mostly lead to death. The fragments also cause strange swelling and poisoning in the body, including test-painted fragments not visible in X-ray fragments. Additionally, Israel has used explosive devices with massive destructive effects in populated areas, which represent one of the most dangerous threats to civilians in contemporary armed conflicts. This explains the intensity of the immense destruction and the transformation of entire residential neighborhoods into rubble and ruins in the Gaza Strip. Despite the presence of texts in international humanitarian law that provide general and specific protection for civilian sites, such as the Fourth Geneva Convention 1949 and the first and the second additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions 1977 and the Hague Convention 1954, which include civilian sites such as homes, schools, universities, hospitals, places of worship, and other lawfully protected facilities, the occupation violated all international principles and norms. The occupation targeted everything that could be targeted. For example, but not limited to, hospitals, mosques, churches, children, women, pregnant women, elderly, men, journalists, doctors, schools, even UNRWA schools, universities, Rafah Crossing, houses, towers, dwellings, camps, ambulances, vehicles, and animals. Not content with all of this, the occupation cut off water, food, electricity, fuel, medicines, and the internet, and all basic necessities to the Gaza Strip. Currently, the people of Gaza have nothing. They have no food, no water, no electricity, which makes them suffer from shelling and slow death simultaneously. Hospitals are in a very bad state due to the lack of electricity, and the injured are in extremely critical condition. It should also be emphasized that there is no safe place in Gaza. There are no shelters for the people of Gaza, as every place and every meter is dangerous for them. Shells are launched at them by land, sea, and air. The occupation, described by the United Nations as a peace-loving state, exploited the current situation in Gaza to commit the worst crimes against the Palestinians in the West Bank under broad international cover. During the month of October, 2,070 Palestinian prisoners were arrested, including 145 children and 55 women, and 1,034 of them were placed in an administrative detention. Administrative detention is detention without charges or trial, based on a secret file and secret evidence that the detainee and their lawyer cannot access. It should be noted that Israel is the only one in the world that uses administrative detention. It has adopted it as a policy to harass Palestinian citizens, contrary to international law and human rights, with the use of the most brutal forms of tortures, and videos of them being tortured are constantly released. Additionally, 2 prisoners were killed in the occupation's prisoners after being tortured since the 7th of October. The occupation arrested 4,000 workers from Gaza Strip, and they were subjected to severe torture during their detention by the occupation's army, which did not stop there. They also stole their money, mobile phones, and personal documents. The occupation continues to commit all crimes against the Palestinian, as it imposed a complete lockdown and checkpoints between cities in the West Bank, with harassment at every step by the occupation soldiers and settlers who now open fire on every Palestinian in front of them and burn their houses. They also shelled several places in the West Bank following a siege on Jenin camp and New Shams camp in Turkey. After reviewing all of the above, which does not constitute 1% of the crimes committed by the occupation against the Palestinians, and in response of the question I posed at the beginning of my statement, for whose benefit was international law created, We see that keeping Israel as a permanent member of the United Nations, despite being a violator of one of the most important conditions of permanent membership, which is being peace-loving, answers this question indirectly. The reality is that the crimes of the occupation can no longer be counted due to their frequency. The question now is not what crimes the occupation is committing, but what crimes it has not committed against the Palestinian. What international treaties has the occupation respected, as if it has committed all these crimes and massacres against the Palestinian people since 1948 to this day. The Palestinian people are now demanding an effective role in the Palestinian cause, an effective role in stopping this war. Solidarity through marches and slogans is no longer effective at this time. We have lost thousands of Palestinians, thousands of children, thousands of dreams. What's the world waiting for now to understand that a real massacre is happening against the Palestinians? Even though the whole world knows about the genocide, no one has stopped it. Still, there is silence from many countries toward what's happening. Despite all this, some countries support these crimes, and what's happening now is a clear image of the double standards that the Palestinians face. Anyone who has not contributed to stop this crime is considered a complicit in it. By genocide, according to the Rome Statute, specifically in Article 6 of it, it means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. What has happened so far in Gaza is partial destruction, but we now warn of total destruction, as the massacres happening now in Gaza have resulted in hundreds of martyrs and thousands of wounded every day. Every day, the brutality increases. We are under an occupation that does not care about the international law, that does not respect it, that violates every right in it. Anyone who gives this occupation the signal is every country that remains silent toward these crimes acts being committed under the cover of these countries. We warn again that it's happening, that there are criminal acts that's happening now and being committed under the cover of these countries. We warn that Gaza now is being bombed every day and everything's becoming more criminal, causing more deaths among our people. It is important to work on spreading awareness of the crimes of this occupation and holding it accountable before the International Criminal Court. But more importantly at this time, it is important to work on stopping these crimes against the Palestinians, because their continuation serves the occupation's goal in all ways to quickly in all ways of ethnic cleansing and seizing all of Palestine. Therefore, we must work in all levels to quickly stop the aggression and put an end to the rivers of blood flowing in the Gaza Strip, and demand that this occupation be held responsible for its war crimes, genocides, and crimes against humanity it has committed and continues to commit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lour. That was a very powerful statement. And what an image. Which crimes, you asked, has Israel not committed? A very powerful question. Which crimes has the country not committed? That was a very good beginning to this webinar. Lots to think about. And I'm sure people have taken a lot of notes, as I have, lots of notes. Peter Mertens took a lot of notes over the last year as he was writing his book, Mutiny, which is about, in a sense, the million mutinies that are going on around the planet. People trying to breathe, really, as they're being suffocated by the fact that governments have just given up on people, in the same way maybe as so many governments have given up on the Palestinians. Peter, you very early called for the fact that Mr. Netanyahu must be pulled up before the International Criminal Court, almost a lone voice in the wilderness of Europe. Tell us a little bit about how you got there, what you've been thinking about.
Do you hear me? No?
Yes,
Fine.
I hear you loud and clear now. Thanks.
Okay. So thanks for inviting me, and what a statement it was from Lour. I'm in Brussels at this moment, and in Brussels there is the head of the European Union, and there's also the head of the NATO here in Brussels, and this image from the beginning of this phase of the war that they are spreading, like it's an all other image than what Laure just told us. She was documenting, she should be speaking before the International Court, Criminal Court. Her testimony should be one of the documents of the International Court because, like you said in the introduction, why does it take that time before we see an arrest warrant to Netanyahu or the generals? And like just after the 7th of October, there was Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, the president of Europe, one could say. And she went immediately to Israel, and she went together with Roberta Metsola. She's the president of the European Parliament. And immediately they supported Netanyahu, and it was on the same time that Netanyahu was announcing the illegal displacement of more than 1 million Palestinians. So the head of state of the European Union and the president of the European Parliament were in Israel at the same time that Netanyahu said we have to displace 1.1 million Palestinians from the north of Gaza. And then one should expect a reaction of the president of the European Parliament, of the president of the European Commission, but they said nothing at that time, nothing. And what does it mean? In my opinion, it means that they are giving a de facto license to continue war crime to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu was very proud. He said, I'm supported, not by any people, or neither by any people in Europe. Don't mistake Europeans. I think also in Europe, we have seen big demonstrations in London, 500,000 people in France, it was forbidden. There are demonstrations in Germany, it's forbidden. There are demonstrations in Brussels. Every day there is demonstration here, a few hundred meters. And so there is no support, popular support for Netanyahu, but there is support of some governments. And then I think Europe has to act. It's not, if Netanyahu and the occupation, the apartheid regime, the war regime against Palestinians can continue, it is also because it's backed by the United States, and it's also because it's backed by the European Union. And that we have to know, if we want to break down this apartheid regime, this war regime, we have also to break it down in Washington and in Brussels. The struggle is an international struggle, and that's why we plead to do 4 things. And the first thing is the subject of this seminar, and it's to bring Netanyahu before the International Court of the Criminal Court. And the second thing is to get rid of this European Association treaty that is there. There is an association treaty. That's the second thing we plead, that it will be postponed, that it will be annihilated in this phase, because you have to know that for this moment, Israel can export all of its products to European Union without any tax. It is tax-free. And Israel can, at this day, have access to European technology, European science, and European science projects for free. That's a treaty, an association treaty between the European Union and Israel. And in that treaty, it's stipulated that if one partner commits war crimes, you can annul this treaty. So we should annul this treaty at this moment. Thirdly, we plead also that there is a military embargo against Israel. So mainly Germany, but also Italy and also other countries are exporting weapons to this apartheid regime, to this war against Palestinians still now. And so we have a call to the European Union to stop these weapon exportations. And I'm very glad that in the trade unions in Belgium last week, there was a big debate because, like in the airport in Liège, there were planes with weapons to Israel, and they were blocked by the workers in the airport. They said, we don't want to be part of war crimes. And I think that that's a just act. They said, no, we are not on strike. It's our duty to not participate in war crimes. And I think that is a good way of viewing that from the working class. We are blocking every weapon export because we don't want to be part of this war crimes that Israel is doing against Palestinian. And so there is an official call of the Belgian trade unions to not participate in any transport of weapons towards Israel. And I hope the other European trade unions will follow this call. And the fourth thing we ask is that Belgium and other European countries recall their ambassadors from Israel. You can argue, will these four measures stop the war? And I know the answer is no. I know the answer is no. But it is important also because there is a political pressure, there is an educational pressure if you advance this kind of measures. That is important. There is an education to make that there is double standards in the imperialist war. You have to educate also people on these double standards. Why could it be done to Ukrainian, and why the sovereignty of Ukrainian is important, but the sovereignty of Palestinian is not important? Why after 104 resolutions of the United Nations, there is not a prosecution and there are no economic sanctions against Israel, and we are now discussing in Europe the 11th basket of sanctions against Russia. These are double standards, and we have to continue to bring it forward. And so that's why we had this call. We have this call to the Belgian government last week that Belgium also support the pledge, refer the pledge to request to the International Criminal Court that the court should examine the war crimes of Netanyahu, and that the court should have a warrant, an arrest warrant to Netanyahu. That's logic, and I think Noor explained it in detail why if the International Criminal Court wants to have any credit at all in the future, it must act now. It must act now. Otherwise, it won't be. Yes, no one would believe the International Criminal Court anymore if it doesn't act at this moment, because if it is about war crimes, Noor explained it, the 6 different war crimes that were stipulated in this Rome Statute, they are all every day, they are all committed by Israel. The 4 crimes against humanity stipulated in the Rome Statute, every day they are all committed in Israel. And even on a genocide issue, it is a difficult issue, and you should not use the word genocide too fast. I think it's a very important, but it is a debate that what Israel is doing at this point, that it has to be also investigated on this question on genocide. When the Jewish professor Ras Zigal said on the 5 conditions of genocide at this point, he says there are 3 conditions on genocide that the Israeli army is already committed at this point. And so I think there are a lot of evidence that is already there. There is also a lot of evidence that can be reassembled and must be reassembled still in Gaza. But we can we must ask the governments, our governments, to support the act to prosecute Netanyahu. I think it's important. Like when in the Ukrainian war, because everything is geopolitical, we know this, because Noor asked the question, why is there any international law? Huh? and in which favor is there international law? It's a very important question that's been asked by Laura. And we know it's also of the balance of force, the correlations of forces. There is no superstructure that's neutral, that's above imperialism. There is a correlation of force. And with the Ukrainian war, we have seen that there have been a rapid reactions. There was a Baltic states that were having this pledge against Russia and against Putin, and that was followed by 43 countries to prosecute Putin. And now it's very important that there is one or two or three countries who support this act to condemn Netanyahu. And if there is one, two, or three countries who starts with this, there will be much more chance that other countries can follow this action against Netanyahu. And I have no illusions that this process will take a lot of time. And meanwhile, the slaughter is going on, I know, but I do think that the act of saying to the global humanity that there is war crimes every day going on in Israel is an important act as such. And that on the base of this prosecution, before the International Criminal Court, we can have all the other necessities, the economic sanctions, the embargo on weapons, the recall of ambassadors and diplomatic relations. So I think it's a totality that we have to face, and it won't change on that level of the International Court. I know that very well, but I do think at the same time that the popular movements in the streets now in Brussels and in London and everywhere in the world, if there is also this juridical mobilization of lawyers worldwide, it can be and it must be a strong case. And I think on some, and maybe that's happened also in the struggle against apartheid. I was a young kid when I was first engaged in Belgium, and it was in the struggle against apartheid. And I think this mobilization, this conscientization with the struggle, there is manifestations on the one hand, there's concrete solidarity like blocking weapons, etc. But there is also the legal part and to expose the complete illegality of what Israel is doing now. That's a little bit our point of view in Europe on this murdering case of Israeli crime.
It's a very powerful case you've made, the 4 points, including one of them, of course, already the example of the Belgian workers refusing to load goods. Yesterday, Peter, at the port of Oakland in California, there was a demonstration to prevent the loading of weapons, a demonstration conducted by sensitive, decent people. People are moving from making a demand to actually trying to put their bodies on the train tracks to say that the weapons will not be allowed to go. So very powerful 4-point agenda from you, Peter, there. And I hope all the countries of the world consider expelling Israeli ambassadors, your point number 4. I think it's a very important point. We're going to move on now to South Africa. Roshan is from BDS South Africa. Roshan, of course, is at an advantage. Her government has come out very strongly against this genocidal war. President Cyril Ramaphosa made a very strong statement. In fact, in Johannesburg, I was at an event where Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor made an extremely strong statement against the crimes being conducted against the Palestinians of Gaza. Roshan, in that sense, you're in an advantage. At least you're not living in India, where the Prime Minister has gone in the completely other direction. But give us a sense from yourself, BDS South Africa, you know, the Pan-African Solidarity Network and so on. What's the thinking about this? And are we going to be able to get the Israelis before the International Court?
Well, thank you. And thank you to Peter and Lua for the important words they said, and for Lua to sort of explaining the mechanisms by which, in particular, the ICC should and as Peter says, must be pressed to act. I mean, yes, from South Africa, from the global south, we're well aware of the hypocrisy of the ICC in particular, and many upholders or institutions that uphold international law. I'm sure many people will know that there's been a big debate here within our ruling party as well, if not within government, about whether or not South Africa should withdraw from the ICC. And there was a tremendous fuss about when we hosted the BRICS summit recently, and obviously there was an invitation to President Putin as a member of BRICS. It was a summit level, and tremendous pressure put on South Africa not to invite him, because obviously we should have then arrested him had he come here. There'd also been a previous incident with the previous Sudanese president. So I think from South Africa and possibly other countries in Africa in particular, with regard to the ICC, there's a lot of feeling, I think we know that there's hypocrisy. And I think Richard Falk puts it quite well over the hypocrisy we're now seeing around their lack of ability to deal with the perpetrators of what is an unfolding genocide against the Palestinian people. He said, well, there's no question about the difference in the treatment of the Russian attack on Ukraine and the Israeli attack on the people of Gaza. It exhibits double standards and moral and legal hypocrisy. In other words, Russia is held accountable and Israel is given impunity. This suggests that international law isn't a framework for regulating states on some basis of equality, but it is a manipulated series of norms that serve the purpose of geopolitical actors. And when it is in their interest to enforce international law, they will be very self-righteous about their behavior in condemning the violators. But if it's in their interest to support the violation of international law, then they will either be silent or, in this case, lend unconditional support to the government and country that is violating international law in the most extreme fashion. And I think that's very telling coming from someone like Richard Falk, and it's certainly something I think people in the global south and in Africa feel. But having said that, I completely agree with Peter, and we have also been putting our name to every single complaint that's being filed that's asking for endorsements to the ICC, to every lobbying around that issue, around how do we take this up, how do we force, I mean, I also think that I don't know if he's called Chief Prosecutor, Karim Khan, should also take a little more responsibility. I mean, I think under the charter or whatever it's called, the rules of the ICC, can take action more strongly not individually as himself, but in his role than he seems to have been doing. To have gone actually to Rafah and then come away without really having achieved much seems like there's obviously extreme pressure on him. But again, it points out the hypocrisy. But I think I agree with Peter that if we don't do this, then we can tear up international law, because Palestine is the litmus test. It is the litmus test of the entire system on which international law is built. I mean, let's not get into the UN, where in fact our government is arguing that the UN, the Security Council system is no longer valid in the world we are living in, the geopolitical reality of the world we're living, where we can see who is in the Security Council as permanent members, the whole issue of the veto, the whole issue of America being able to veto even the smallest humanitarian assistance, vetoing humanitarian pauses, when that same America was up in arms about, as you mentioned in the beginning, Vijay, around Russia not allowing humanitarian corridors. So, I think in a very strong statement from our minister recently, that was also pointed out, and the constant lobbying of to change the way in which, in this case, the United Nations arrangement is made. And also, why doesn't America have to go before the General Assembly under that new resolution and explain the veto and have a debate? You could see the majority of countries in the world actually do care. They are humanitarian. They haven't broken the bloc vote of Africa. Actually, when you look at the General Assembly vote, most people do care, most governments, whether that's because people are pushing them, which it is, and I want to get onto that, do care about what's going on, do want to see at the very minimum humanitarian aid getting in, and mostly are demanding a ceasefire. I think that's clear from the General Assembly vote. But I think also what is important is the fact that it's now people power that we're seeing across the world. And I think that was exactly what happened in the international support for our struggle against apartheid in South Africa. The Palestinians have made the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, as you mentioned, in 2005. It's coming from every single Palestinian person. It's a unified call from Palestinian people on the international community to implement boycotts, divestments, and sanctions to isolate apartheid Israel. There is now a consensus, I would say, that Israel is an apartheid state, that it commits the crime against humanity of apartheid as described, as defined in the Apartheid Convention. Now, using our example, the mechanisms that were put in place, the ways in which people pressed their governments. I mean, in Britain, it was, what the most right-wing government of the time. I mean, now we have another there, most right-wing government of the time, but it was Thatcher's Britain. And yet people mobilized. It took decades, actually. It's hard work. It's not something that happens quickly. And it's urgent in the case of the unfolding genocide. But nevertheless, people coming together, teaching each other, finding out what's going on, arguing the case, why you shouldn't be buying products made in an apartheid state, why shops shouldn't be selling them, why companies shouldn't be investing. And after, and it built and it built and it built. And the tipping points were when there were tipping points in the struggle here in South Africa. So after 1976, when the school children protested and were brutally shot down at the time and arrested children. And then again in the 80s, mid-80s, when the trade union movement was mobilizing very strongly here, and communities here were making the townships ungovernable. And I think we're seeing that in Palestine, because Palestinian people have the right to resist. It's clear under international law, if it's not going to be used as a if we're taking it as what it should be, an equitable set of rules, Palestinian people have the right to resist, and they're resisting all the time throughout Palestine. And I think when you see that kind of, like 2 years ago in what was called the Unity Intifada, where you saw from Sheikh Jarrah to Gaza to within 48 territories, people acting in support of each other, acting to resist apartheid in the different ways in which apartheid divides and rules and segregates and discriminates differently. But you could see then people coming together, and I think that's the case now. And we have to stress, I think, the resistance of Palestinians is a right, and that when Palestinian people resist, then it also boosts the international solidarity movement. It boosts the pressure on them. Of course, now the absolute, indescribable assault of the apartheid state, the unfolding genocide, because it's not just in Gaza. It's been the deadliest year in the West Bank, and since 7th of October, I think more than 100 now people have been killed in the West Bank. And that's basically a shoot-to-kill policy of the occupation forces and the illegal settlers. I mean, that's, extrajudicial killings on a massive scale, as well as the issue of the illegal settlers. I mean, a few days before the 7th of October, there was yet another pogrom in the village of Hawara in the West Bank. And we know that the minister was saying before that this village of Hawara should be eliminated. So all the things that the Israeli ministers are saying, and that's ministers, indicate intent. So I think we can clearly see it as genocide now, because they keep expressing this intent. They are saying it. They are saying they want to wipe out villages. They want to expel people. Palestinians are human animals. What more does the international community need to say, to leverage these international legal options and these institutions like the ICC? But as I say, we know there's hypocrisy, but I think the mention that Peter made also of the trade unions, it was amazing to see that the Belgian trade unions have said this. And we hope that, our unions, we worked with our unions 2 years ago around Block the Boat campaign. It was part of a campaign with the comrades in Oakland and other places around the States and Europe to block the Zim lines, an Israeli-owned shipping company, from docking, where they were unloading or offloading actual Israeli goods or goods destined for Israel, but also just as an Israeli shipping company. And I think there's been some interest in our union movement for doing that again. There's been expressions of that. I know, Vijay, you heard the call our minister made to the trade unions. But I have to say that it's regrettable. We came from a protest just this morning, a protest we held because America has been holding this AGOA trade talks here with the American trade minister and our minister. And we've been saying, you can't have trade with apartheid. You can't have business as usual. How can you be negotiating the extension of this AGOA Act, which actually is not necessarily very beneficial, to be honest, to South Africa or African countries? But let alone that, how can we have business as normal with the enabler and the funder and the financer of the genocide? Just yesterday, as we saw the bombs falling on the ambulances lined up around Shifa, I saw that America, the House of Representatives, had agreed to Biden's new additional funding for the Israeli military, amongst others. Additional, I think it's $14 billion. That's additional to what it already provides in military funding. And yet a country like South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, is having a normal trade talks. Some of the unions were present and some of the union federations, but it's regrettable that some of the ones who we know have the resources to do so, and we know have made the commitments. And I know Vijay was, has heard this from those unions, have not been mobilizing to the extent we would like, that would be in solidarity with the Palestinian unions who have made a call on the international trade union movement. It would be in solidarity with the unions in Belgium who are taking action, and others around the world, in Oakland, and I'm sure in Italy, again, those unions in the ports will do the same thing, and other unions around the world. So I think we really need to ensure that where especially trade unions are making those commitments, they act on them, and they come in the streets and they show their support and they show their protest at the Americans and their funding of the genocide. But I think it is up to us as people, and that was the same in our struggle. And it's heartening to hear today and to see also when you see in America, for instance, the Jewish Voice for Peace led protests, and people taking over stations in Britain, people are shutting down arms factories in Britain as well. And I think we have to take heart that the people of the world are saying, no, we're not going to sit and watch genocide unfold on our news screens. We do care, and we're going to push our governments. And if we could push Thatcher's Britain that far, then we damn well can push, the Western governments at the moment. I know it's a different geopolitical climate. I know that they're probably even more committedly reactionary than they were then. That was just the beginning. But I honestly think if it should be a rebirth of international solidarity, led by the Palestinian people and their call for that through the BDS movement, but for all of us to support each other in the struggle, for Belgian unions, right to our South African unions, in line with the Palestinian Trade Union Court. Let's really try to pull together and insist and force and stop this, using international law, forcing the international legal framework to accept that it's being used in a hypocritical way, not that it was necessarily written like that. But yes, we must keep on pressing, and we have to get those Netanyahus and people prosecuted. We have to. Otherwise, we can tear up international law, and then, we're entering another even more scary era. So we do need to use that, to hold on to that, use it where we can, even knowing the way in which it is being misused, I would say. But I'll end there. Thank you. And thanks for inviting a voice from the BDS movement in South Africa. Also, just to end, we still have an apartheid Israeli embassy here, comrades, I want you to know. And that's one of our key demands as well. Why should we have this in a post-apartheid South Africa? Why should we have an ambassador sitting there in his embassy in Pretoria? So yes, we have the same demand, even, unfortunately, in a post-apartheid South Africa. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Roshan. We're back to Peter's 4 points. That was the fourth point You know, there is a danger for Crown Prosecutor Karim Khan, Roshan, because some Israeli families have actually made a complaint to the International Criminal Court against Hamas for war crimes, genocide, and so on. And you know how these things work. If Karim Khan takes that complaint seriously and not the complaint of the 10,000 dead Palestinians for now, they're going to vitiate that institution even more. I mean, it's unlikely that The Hague is ever going to see the likes of George W. Bush, Tony Blair, others who conducted a criminal war against Iraq. They've never, ever had to face the fact that that was a criminal war. And criminal, not because, we say it, criminal because the Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, said so on a BBC program in 2004, a year into the war. He said, it's a criminal war. If it's a criminal war, why weren't the architects of that war hauled before The Hague, at least for questioning? Not at all. Impunity has a long history, and it has to end at some point. Let that impunity end in Gaza. Let this be the time when we draw the line under atrocity and say, genuinely, never again. Let's do that. Let's do it now. Let's follow these 4 points. Let's do it right now. You've been with No Cold War, Tricontinental, a whole host of organizations. We've had Lur Salhi from the People's Party of Palestine. Peter Mertens used to be the president, now is the national secretary of the Workers' Party of Belgium, author of a brand new book called Mutiny. Roshan Dadu from BDS South Africa, Pan-African Solidarity Network, and so on. So glad to be with all of you. Looking forward to the next time we can gather for a conversation like this. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot. And that's it.